When you hear the word cynic, what image pops into your head? Probably someone who's a little sarcastic, maybe a bit distrustful, always expecting the worst in people. But what if I told you the original cynics were actually on a quest for happiness through radical virtue? Let's uncover the real story of the ancient world's most misunderstood and maybe most relevant philosophers.
I mean, just look at this. The difference is night and day. On the left, you've got today's cynic, defined by negativity and distrust. But the ancient cynic, on the right, they were part of a school of thought completely dedicated to achieving virtue and happiness. So how in the world did the meaning get so twisted? That's the big question we're going to tackle.
So, okay, what was ancient cynicism all about? First thing, forget the modern attitude. This was a complete philosophy, a whole school of thought with one massive goal: to figure out how to live a truly good life, completely free from all of society's rules and expectations.
At the very heart of their philosophy was this concept, eudaimonia. It's a really powerful Greek word. It doesn't just mean happiness. It's more like human flourishing, or living your absolute best life. And the Cynics argued you couldn't find it by chasing wealth, power, or fame. Nope. For them, the only way was to live in sync with nature, guided by reason and virtue, and to become totally self-sufficient.
Now, this is where things get really interesting, and maybe a little weird. Their whole pursuit of a natural life led to them being called dogs. But it's probably not for the reason you think. Let's dig into where the name cynic actually came from.
So the Greek word for cynic is kunikos, which literally translates to dog-like. Yeah, you heard that right, dog-like. So why on earth would a group of philosophers not only get this nickname, but actually embrace it?
Well, they leaned right into that dog label for a few key reasons. First, like dogs, they live with this radical indifference to what people thought, eating and sleeping in public without any shame. They rejected stuff like conventional modesty, calling it an artificial, unnatural rule. They also saw themselves as guardians, fiercely protecting their philosophy. And just like a good watchdog, they believed they could sniff out who was a true friend to their ideas and who was an enemy. They didn't just take the insult, they wore it like a badge of honor.
And you have to understand, this dog-like philosophy wasn't just some theory they wrote down. It was a way of life, embodied by some of the most eccentric and rebellious figures in all of ancient history. Let's meet the key players.
It all really starts with this guy, Antisthenes. Now, he was a student of Socrates, and he was just blown away by how his teacher couldn't care less about wealth or fame. Antisthenes took those Socratic ideas, ran with them, and laid the groundwork for Cynicism, pushing for a life of radical simplicity and even poverty.
But the man who is cynicism, the one who truly defines it, is Diogenes of Sinope. This guy is the ultimate cynic, the archetype. He took the philosophy to its absolute extreme. He famously rejected all his possessions and lived in a big ceramic jar on the streets of Athens. He was basically a performance artist, using his own life as a critique of the society around him.
And this quote from him, it just says everything about his mission. Diogenes saw himself as a watchdog for humanity. And his bites were these sharp, witty, and often shocking criticisms designed to wake people up from their mindless conformity and, as he saw it, save them from their own foolishness.
One of the most famous stories about him, you might have heard this one, is that he'd walk through the crowded marketplace in the middle of the day holding a lit lantern. When people asked him what in the world he was doing, he'd just reply, "I'm looking for an honest man." Just a brilliant theatrical jab at the hypocrisy he saw everywhere.
And get this, when anyone asked Diogenes where he was from, he wouldn't say his hometown. He'd reply, "I am a citizen of the world, a cosmopolitus." This was a revolutionary, mind-blowing idea at the time. With that one phrase, he basically rejected the idea of narrow loyalties to one city in favor of a shared, universal humanity.
A core practice for the Cynics was something called anideia, which basically means shamelessness or impudence. They would intentionally and publicly break social conventions, what the Greeks called nomos, to prove a point, that most of these customs weren't natural laws. They were just arbitrary human inventions that were actually getting in the way of living a virtuous life.
So who do you think was the ideal role model for a cynic? Not some king or politician, but the mythical hero Heracles. They really admired his strength, his endurance, and his choice to embrace a life of deliberate hardship, what they called ponos. For them, Heracles was the ultimate example of someone who achieved greatness through virtue alone, not through all the stuff society valued.
Now, you might be thinking of the Cynics as just a fringe movement of eccentrics, but their ideas had a massive and lasting influence that rippled all the way through history, shaping entire philosophies and even religions for centuries to come.
This timeline just shows the incredible reach of their ideas. It starts in the late 400s BC, peaks with Diogenes, but it doesn't stop there. This is crucial. Its core principles were absorbed by Zeno of Citium, the guy who founded Stoicism. Then, after a huge revival in the Roman Empire, its ascetic practices found a new home in early Christianity. That's some serious influence.
And this quote from the Stoics really says it all. They saw Cynicism not as some bizarre lifestyle, but as a shortcut to the virtuous life they were also seeking. The Stoics essentially took the core ideas of Cynicism and kind of repackaged them for mainstream society, but they never forgot where those ideas came from.
And the influence didn't even stop there. If you look at early Christian ascetics, like the Desert Fathers, they lived lives that looked remarkably cynic. That emphasis on rejecting worldly possessions, living in poverty, and focusing entirely on a virtuous spiritual existence, you can see a clear parallel between the two movements. Which brings us right back to our original question. If cynicism was all about virtue, freedom, and happiness, how did its name come to mean the exact opposite?
Well, the meaning started to shift over many centuries, but by the 19th century, the transformation was pretty much complete. People forgot about the positive goal, that whole eudaimonia thing, and they started to focus only on the negative methods, the biting criticism, the rejection of social norms, the shamelessness. The why they did it was lost, and only the how they did it remained.
So, here's the bottom line. Ancient cynicism was a philosophy of liberation. It was about freeing yourself from desire in order to achieve virtue. Modern cynicism is an attitude of scorn, a deep distrust of everyone else's motives. They really couldn't be more different.
And that leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? The original Cynics chose a dog's life to challenge conventions and live authentically. In our own age, an age of constant distraction, social pressure, and conformity, maybe, just maybe, there's something we can still learn from their radical pursuit of a simple, virtuous, and truly free life.